My name's Jim Gindlesperger. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be back here. This is my second visit with the Congress, and I want to thank Mike for inviting me back, and appreciate all those who are tuned in to hear what we're going to talk about tonight. Basically, we're going to discuss my latest book, my ninth book. It's titled The Medal of Honor at Gettysburg, published by History Press. And as it sounds, we're going to talk about the 72 men who earned the Medal of Honor during the Gettysburg campaign. And so this is where we're starting right now. We'll just kick off. Basically, the Medal of Honor, it's the highest medal we have for valor. And probably nobody said it better than President Truman in 1946 when he said he'd rather have a Medal of Honor than be President of the United States. And that pretty well sums it up, the prestige that comes along with earning that. A little bit of miscellaneous information. It really is more, not so much historical. I guess it is a little bit, but not so much historical as it is just of some interest. It kind of answers many of the questions that come up about the book and about the Medal of Honor itself. And one of the most common questions I get is who got the first Medal of Honor? And that Medal of Honor was awarded to a man named Jacob Parrott from the 33rd Ohio in March of 1863 for action about a year earlier. And you're familiar with that action, most likely. Jacob Parrott was one of the 24 men who commandeered a locomotive at Big Shanty, Georgia, and went north with it, being chased by the Confederacy, and it became known as the Great Locomotive Chase. It was made into a movie, and their purpose was to tear up track and tear down telegraph lines and so on. So Parrott was the very first one to receive the medal. Since him, there have been 3,535 medals awarded to 3,516 recipients. Now, you notice there's a discrepancy there in those numbers. And the reason for that is there have been 19 individuals who have earned the medal 2 times. Possibly or probably the best known individual in that group would be George Custer's brother, Thomas, who earned his medal 2 times. But there have been 19 double recipients. Of these medals, close to 40% or so were awarded during the Civil War, 1,523 of them, and 72 of those took place in the Gettysburg campaign. And those are the ones that I address in the book. I put every one of the 72 in with the actions that they took to earn their medal. Now, there are going to be some, if you read of them, you're going to say, why did that merit a medal? And you'd be justified in thinking that, but in every case, the award was given and was continued after there was a rescindency later on. We'll talk about some of those. Not going to have time to do all 72, obviously, but we'll get onto a few of those. There have been 2 father-son combinations who earned the medal. Arthur MacArthur and Douglas MacArthur both earned. And the 2 Roosevelts, Teddy Roosevelt Sr. and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. also earned that medal. There are also 7 sets of brothers who earned out of that entire group. The youngest recipient, and this is a question that also comes up fairly routinely when I do these talks, who was the youngest recipient? It was 13-year-old William Willie Johnston of the 3rd Vermont. He was a drummer boy, obviously, and his was for general gallantry in the Peninsula campaign. Nothing specific, but he just generally performed heroically and was awarded the medal accordingly. Now, a little bit of background. Where did the Medal of Honor begin? It started out in the Revolutionary War when George Washington decided that there should be some kind of recognition for those who performed heroically. And he developed what was called the Badge of Military Merit. And this is what it looked like. It was a patch, basically, that you could sew on your uniform. And if you look at that closely, you see it looks very closely to our Purple Heart today, and there's a reason for that. The Purple Heart was based on this, although it's not a patch any longer, obviously. But this was a patch that was developed by George Washington, done only during the Revolutionary War. When the war was over, whether the thinking was there would never be any more wars, I can't imagine they thought that, but whatever the reason, this patch was discontinued. And between the end of the Revolutionary War and the beginning of the Civil War, or prior to the Civil War, there was no official medal or patch or badge or anything like that that was given. What was done, as most people were aware who are listening tonight, were brevet promotions. And these were restricted to officers only. They were an honorary award, had no extra money attached, no extra responsibility, but it gave you the opportunity to call yourself a brevet, whatever. And it was usually to the next highest rank. So if you were a captain, you may get a brevet major, or if you were a colonel, you may get a brevet brigadier general. Now, there was an exception to that. It didn't happen often, but if you're working under a special assignment from the president, it could be that you could skip a couple ranks and go from, say, brevet, or from a major to a brevet brigadier general or something. And this was highly unusual, but the provision was in the regulations, and it was used on a few occasions, not very often. So 1861 comes along. We're now at war between the North and the South, and there are a number of heroic actions being taken, and the decision is made, we need to have some kind of award to recognize the enlisted men who do something with a great deal of gallantry. So this medal was developed. This happens to be the Navy version because it was the first one, followed about 2 months later by the Army version of the medal. And it was a pin more so than a ribbon. We didn't have the ribbon at that time. And you can see it better on the picture of the Army version. It was pinned to the uniform. The only difference, or basic difference, was the connector between the ribbon and the star itself, the fouled anchor for the Navy, the eagle perched on the cannon tubes for the Army. And this was used, it had some variations in it over the years, but it was basically the medal that was in effect until 1896, when there was a major development. And this was the medal that was in vogue at that time. This is the Army version, and you can see it really didn't vary much from the original version. But after the war was over, many organizations, like the regimental organizations, divisions, corps, even the Army in some cases, would have reunions or conventions. And as part of that, those who attended were given some kind of a ribbon as a commemorative sign that they were actually a participant. And those are somewhat rare today. So if you see one of those in an antique shop or somewhere, it's not a bad idea to grab hold of it. But in 1896, the GAR had their national convention, and they wanted to make it something special. So they had their commemorative ribbon looked like this. And you can see right away that it's a takeoff from the Medal of Honor. And this was not lost on those who had received the Medal of Honor. They were very indignant about this, said, hey, we earned our medal on the field of battle. These people got theirs from going to a convention, and they thought there should not be that kind of familiarity. So they went to Congress and they said, we want some kind of exclusivity for the Medal of Honor. And Congress agreed. And they did what Congress does best, even today. They formed a committee. And this committee was made up of strictly Medal of Honor recipients, headed by another Medal of Honor recipient named George Gillespie. And they went through a number of iterations and designs to decide what kind of a medal did they want to have as their exclusive. And they came up with one. In 1904, they were awarded a patent, and the patent was awarded to Gillespie since he was the one who filed the paperwork. Why it was a patent and not a copyright, I'm not sure, but that was the way it was set up. And Gillespie immediately assigned the patent rights over to Secretary of War Taft, so that it was now a government award officially. These are the Gillespie medals. This was the Army version, and now you see it's starting to look a little bit like our modern day version with the 13-star ribbon and so on, commemorating the original 13 colonies. The medals themselves are a little bit different, but still basically the same, and still a pin. The version that came up through the Gillespie design remained as a pin without the neck ribbon. This ribbon, or this pin, was used as the award until about 1916, when it was decided that maybe some of these awards had been given out for reasons that really were less than gallantry. This was supposedly to be used as a reward for being heroic in action, and there were some things that kind of stood out that indicated that that wasn't always the case. And the thing that really kind of tipped them off was a news article in the Portland, Maine Advertiser. And it said that basically the governor has just found out that the men of the 27th Maine have been given medals of honor for reenlisting. And Congress began investigating this, and they found out indeed that did happen. There were 864 members, no less, who got medals of honor for just signing up for a second term of enlistment, which kind of flies in the face of the requirements for gallantry, which even existed at that time. So after they looked into it a lot, not only were the 864 members of the 27th Maine found out to have been given medals in error, or at least in defiance of the rules, there were a number of other ones as well. They found out that those who served in the honor guard at the Lincoln funeral were all rewarded with medals of honor as a thank you for what they did. And you can see the honor guard here performing heroically, standing at attention at the bier of Lincoln. And it got worse. They found out that a lieutenant colonel said he'd like a souvenir of his time in the service. Could I have a Medal of Honor? And they said certainly. And he was given one as a token of their appreciation. Buffalo Bill and a number of Indian Scouts received a thank you in the form of a Medal of Honor. And a civilian doctor named Mary Walker was given a Medal of Honor as a token of Congress's thanks for her efforts in treating the wounded during the Civil War. And she would actually go out onto the field of battle. She did somewhat heroically earn hers, but she was not a member of the military, even though she was captured at Chancellorsville, became a prisoner of war. This was designed for military personnel. So as a civilian, she was deemed unworthy of the medal. And the government decided of all these medals that they thought were not handed out properly should be returned. And they sent out notices, if you got one of these, we want it back. Mary Walker was a little bit on the defiant side, and she said, you ain't getting mine. And she made no bones about it. She spent the rest of her life wearing her medal every day, and you can see it right here on her dress. Now, there were a number who had their medals rescinded that did get them back. So precedent was set. Buffalo Bill was one of those who got his back after an appeal was made. And in 1977, a number of Mary Walker's descendants got together and began a lobbying campaign to get her medal officially returned. They still had it in the family. It had never been returned to the government. But they wanted it to be official that she earned that medal. And they began letter writing to Congress, to the Department of the Army, even to the president. And eventually, Congress did reinstate her medal. So she's officially, even though she was a civilian, she is officially a recipient of the Medal of Honor, and she's remains to this day the only woman to have ever received that. As you may guess, something as prestigious as the Medal of Honor comes with some controversy, and it was no different for the actual Medal of Honor. In 1921, the end of World War I, Britain, France, Italy honored their unknown soldiers by picking one unknown soldier from their respective countries to represent all the unknowns from that country. And Congress, as a show of appreciation for our allies, authorized the president to present medals of honor, our Medal of Honor, to these three countries' unknown soldiers. As you can imagine, this stirred up a great deal of controversy among not only Medal of Honor recipients, but the general public as well. Within a few months, however, by the end of the year, we had our own Medal of Honor, our own unknown, representing all the unknowns. And the picture here, you can see President Harding placing a Medal of Honor on the casket of the unknown soldier, representing each man who was unknown and killed in the war. This became a custom. All the unknowns since then, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam unknowns, have also been presented with the Medal of Honor. Now, those medals are not buried with the remains. They've been retained, and they're visible in the Amphitheater Museum, which sits just above the steps at the Medal of Honor. Where, if you've been to see the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknowns, you stood on those steps most likely, and at the top of those steps is the Amphitheater Museum, and you can go in and see the medals that have been awarded. The Vietnam Unknown, as we know, was rescinded because the Vietnam unknown soldier was identified through DNA testing. It was Michael Blassie. He was a captain in the Air Force. His remains were taken out of the Tomb of the Unknown and sent to Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery near St. Louis, which is where Captain Blassie was from. So the crypt for the unknown soldier for Vietnam is empty and will remain empty. There probably won't be any more unknowns now that we have DNA testing, most likely. But that has been the custom. Each of our unknown soldiers has been given a Medal of Honor. 1922, we gave another unknown soldier a Medal of Honor. The unknown soldier from Belgium, followed the next year by the unknown soldier from Romania. And each time this was done, the controversy flared up again. And finally, Congress said we weren't going to give any more Medals of Honor to unknown soldiers from any of our allies. So places like Canada and others, Australia, they have unknown soldiers, but they don't have an American Medal of Honor. So let's talk about some of those who earned the medal. These are in no particular order. They just were some that I pulled out as representative of what these men did to earn that honor. This is Captain Francis Waller of the 6th Wisconsin on the first day of fighting. And this is his entire citation here. Captured the flag of the 2nd Mississippi Infantry. The 6th Wisconsin's monument is right here, and that is about where Captain Waller, or Corporal Waller, earned his medal. There is a painting of this. Dale Gallen made a painting of the actual fighting in this area, and you can see Waller capturing that flag in this painting. First day, the battle went back and forth, and eventually the Mississippians were forced to retreat. And they retreated back, this is on McPherson's Ridge, back to the railroad cut. Now, this railroad cut was just a cut. This bridge wasn't there at the time. The railroad tracks didn't go through it, but it was an opening in the line, and you can see that would provide a nice barrier for some protection. Of course, they were followed by the 6th Wisconsin. Waller spotted the flag bearer for the 6th Wisconsin and made his way to this flag bearer in hopes of capturing the flag. And just as he got there, the flag bearer was shot, and Waller grabbed the flag as it was falling to the ground, stood on it so that nobody would take it from him, and continued to fight. Within a few minutes, a Confederate soldier was very close to Waller, because this was all hand to hand at this point, raised his gun, and it was only a matter of a few feet away from Waller. And just as he was ready to pull the trigger, a Union soldier brought his gun up under the barrel of the Confederate soldier, and the shot went above Waller's head, obviously saving his life. And it turned out that the man who saved Waller's life was his own brother. So he had a little vested interest there in protecting Francis. So Waller got the Medal of Honor. And unfortunately for Waller, one of those hard luck guys, in 1880, one of his own mates from the 6th Wisconsin challenged that and said, Waller did not earn that Medal of Honor. I captured the flag. So it became a controversy in its own, forcing Waller to get affidavits and official records and so on, which did prove that he had earned that right to have the Medal of Honor. As luck would have it, it happened a second time, which is very unusual. About 3 years later, another member of the 6th Wisconsin challenged Waller again, and saying that, no, I'm the one who captured that flag. And Waller had to go through the whole process again of defending himself and being declared the rightful recipient of the Medal of Honor. And he won his case a second time. After he died, his family donated his medal to a museum. And the last indignity for Mr. Waller was that in 1977, the medal was stolen, came up missing, and for 14 years, it was missing. As luck would have it, finally things turned around for Corporal Waller, even though he was no longer with us. An antique dealer was hired to clean out an estate. And in so doing, he found this medal and put it up for sale. Had no idea exactly what it was or how important it was, but and at that time he didn't know that you weren't allowed to sell a Medal of Honor. And a potential buyer saw it and recognized it right away. He didn't know whose it was, but he knew what it was. And he got in touch with this antique dealer. The two got together with the family, and they agreed that the flag, or that the medal, should not be sold, and they donated it back to the museum. So as far as I know, it's still on display now under hopefully a little better security than the first time. Alonzo Cushing, most of us are aware of that story of Alonzo Cushing, a lieutenant in the 4th U.S. Light Artillery. This took place during Pickett's charge. He was in command of a battery. His men were falling down by one at a time, either being wounded to the point of being unable to continue to operate the gun, or maybe even killed, to the point where Cushing himself had to step in to help man the guns. In so doing, he was wounded by a shell fragment, hit him in the shoulder, was wounded shortly after that. His citation, which this is the whole citation, by the way, I highlighted the most important part, but you can read the whole thing if you're interested. He was actually struck in the groin. They cleaned up the citation a little bit to say abdomen, but he was wounded in the groin area, suffered a tremendous amount of blood loss and became very weak, had to actually prop himself up against the cannon. Eventually got so bad that his sergeant, Frederick Fugger, had to put his arm around Cushing to hold him up. Fugger himself was a Medal of Honor awardee for his actions this same day in the same action. But eventually Cushing became so weak that he could hardly shout out orders, and he was relegated to a loud whisper, basically, to Fugger, who in turn relayed the orders to the gun crew as to what to do and when to do it. As Pickett's charge came closer and closer, Cushing said to Fugger, "I have time for one last shot." And he was on the lanyard, by the way. And just as he was ready to pull the lanyard, he was struck. A bullet went through his mouth, came out the back of his head, killed him instantly, and he never did get that shot off. So we know the end result of Pickett's charge, and the war eventually ends, and Cushing is lost to history, basically. And anybody who hears his story thinks, why didn't this guy get the Medal of Honor? But nobody did anything about it until many years later, a woman living in Wisconsin read his story and thought what most others did: this man deserves the Medal of Honor. And she took it on herself to begin a letter writing campaign. And she wrote to anybody who she thought may have some authority to take a look at this. And for 15 years, I mean, this is dedication. This lady wrote letter after letter until finally Senator Russ Feingold of Wisconsin looked at the letter and said, "This woman is right. She's certainly correct in saying that Cushing, if anybody earned the Medal of Honor, it was Alonzo Cushing." So Feingold introduced his legislation and finally got it through. It took him 8 years, but he finally got it through. So we're now up to the year 23 from the time the first letter was sent out. And unfortunately, with budget cuts, this award to Cushing was cut out of the budget. Cost a fraction of what the budget was, I'm sure, but it was removed, and it took 2 more years to get it back into the budget, and it went through the approval process of Congress and the Department of the Army and the president. And finally, in 2014, President Obama awarded Cushing's Medal of Honor to a distant cousin. Cushing was 21 years old and unmarried when he was killed, had no descendants, and it was something like a second cousin 5 times removed or something of that nature. But this woman received his Medal of Honor, and Cushing, no doubt, will be the last Civil War veteran to receive this, but he's now an official Medal of Honor hero. If you remember the picture of the cover of the book, and I'm going to show it again at the end here, but this is the picture that was on the cover. It's a painting by Dale Gallen. It's called Bayonet Forward. And I like this painting because it showed 2 Medal of Honor recipients in action doing what they did to earn the medal. You can see Joshua Chamberlain here, the colonel of the 20th Maine, and Andrew Tozier, who was the flag bearer on July 2nd, when Little Round Top came under attack from Alabama troops. Tozier and Chamberlain being the 2 Medal of Honor recipients. And Dale Gallen was gracious enough to allow me to use this painting. I had to, of course, purchase the rights, but it was a very nominal fee. And the painting became part of the cover. Again, you can see the citation here. But Tozier has his own story. It's kind of an interesting background. Tozier was part of the 2nd Maine. And if you remember the movie Gettysburg, prior to the battle, a number of men from the 2nd Maine had mutinied. a number of the men of the Second Maine had reached the end of their enlistment period and were sent home. Those who remained, there were about 120 of them that remained, said, we are not going to be dispersed. We're going to fight as the Second Maine. And there weren't enough of them. There weren't enough to be an effective fighting force. And they were placed under arrest for mutiny because they refused to be dispersed to various other regiments. In the movie, you saw that they were brought under armed guard to the closest camp, which happened to be the 20th Maine's camp. And they were turned over to Chamberlain with the orders that if any one of them tried to escape, shoot them. They're mutineers. And Chamberlain didn't want to shoot anybody, obviously, and he called a few representatives from the Second Maine to him and said, what's your complaint? What are your grievances? And he listened to them. And he said, well, I can't promise you I can get you what you want, but I'll do what I can if you decide to come with us as members of the 20th Maine. And they got together and decided that was a better fate. So they did join up with the 20th Maine, and Tozier was one of these, joined just as another enlisted man. A few weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg, the color bearer of the 20th Maine became drunk and very belligerent, got into a lot of trouble, and was relieved of his duties as color bearer. And the task of being the official color bearer for the regiment fell on the next highest senior member of the regiment, who happened to be Andrew Tozier. Even though he was a new member of the 20th Maine, he was the oldest in terms of service as a member of the 2nd Maine. So Tozier became the color bearer for the 20th Maine and was the color bearer on July 2nd. And as the picture here depicts, this is just before the famous swinging gate charge that was made down the side of Little Round Top against the 15th Alabama. There's some controversy as to whether Chamberlain is the one who actually called for that. He's credited with it as the senior officer. Some say one of his sergeants suggested that, but at any rate, the 20th Maine, almost out of ammunition, fixed bayonets, mounted a charge down against the 15th Alabama and took many captives, and is credited with protecting the entire left flank of the Union Army. Tozier, when the alarm was given to, or the order was given to launch the assault, raced out in front as the flag bearer. Of course, that was his job. And he stood in front, even as the shooting was going back and forth in no man's land, very defiantly waving that flag. There are some reports that say he held the flag under one arm and fired his weapon with the other. And official reports pretty much support that argument. So he was rewarded with the Medal of Honor for his action on July 2nd. After the war was over, unfortunately, Tozier and his brother fell into a life of crime. Were arrested in 1869 for robbery and were placed in custody. The governor of Maine said, I know that man. I know he's a good man. And if he would agree to come and live with me so I can keep an eye on him, I will pardon him. And the governor was this man, Chamberlain. Tozier agreed and went to live with the Chamberlain family for a number of years. Finally felt that it was time he could move out. He had mended his ways. He became a farmer, but the rigors of farming eventually took its toll, and he took a job in a factory and eventually passed away. But this is Andrew Tozier, who is one of the 72 men who are described in the book. This is one of my favorite stories from the book. It's Charles Stacy, 55th Ohio, and I have no connection to the 55th Ohio, so there's no nepotism here. It's just that his story, I think, exemplifies the kind of individual that the Medal of Honor was meant to go to. 55th Ohio came to the battlefield in the afternoon of July 1st and took up a position along the Emmitsburg Road. Really didn't see any action that day, but as they were sitting around as idle soldiers do, they were just kind of watching what was going on around them. There was a couple other soldiers who had come from another regiment who were carrying a kettle full of coffee, and they had it on a pole that ran between their soldiers, and the two of them were walking in tandem carrying this kettle of coffee, and a shell went off nearby, and it scared the two men, and they jumped, and one of them fell down, and the contents of the kettle were spilled. And of course, this was very amusing to the men of the 55th Ohio who were looking on, and it brought great laughter, kind of broke some of the tension. But Stacy made the vow to himself that he would never, ever become the butt of a joke for anybody. And if he was called on to do his duty, he would do that and more. Didn't really recognize that would come to pass the very next day. July 2nd, they found themselves under fire from a group of Confederate sharpshooters. And with the fighting going on, it was difficult to see exactly where those sharpshooters were located. Stacy volunteered to go out in front of the line, draw their fire so that those who were looking could try to observe and see, maybe they could pick up where those sharpshooters were located. It wasn't long till Stacy ran across two of them. They saw each other at about the same time. Stacy dispatched one of them immediately and then got into a short gunfight with the second one before he killed that man as well. But all this drew the attention of the other sharpshooters, obviously, and the men of the 55th Ohio could see where that sharpshooter regiment was. So a battle went on between the two lines, with Stacy crouched down in the weeds between them. It was basically a small wheat field. He took up a position behind a fence, which didn't offer a whole lot of protection, but it did help a little bit. In the process of all this, Stacy's sergeant saw him under fire and thought he could maybe do something to help him, started out to lend a hand, and he was hit in the face with splinters from that fence and had to retreat back. So Stacy was by himself for a total of 4 hours and held off the entire regiment single-handedly. There's no known number of casualties that he made, but he did hold off the entire regiment, held the position for the 55th Ohio until it was time for them to pull back. Stacy went back to the line and successfully retreated. Later in the day, however, he was captured in another skirmish and became a prisoner of war, and was actually a prisoner of war until May of 1864, when he was released from duty and had time to get back to the 55th in time for the final part of the war. So this is Stacy, and I like his story, and have talked to an ancestor of his who has given me some interesting information as well on this that helped flesh out this whole story. This is Major Edmund Rice, 19th Massachusetts. And by now, the Medal of Honor had been given to officers as well as just enlisted men. It was deemed appropriate for everybody who did something heroic. Now, Rice was in charge of the 19th Massachusetts on July 3rd, as we know, Pickett's charge. You can see his a portion of his citation here. The 19th Massachusetts was not at much of a strength, a position of strength because of their casualties they had taken already. So that it didn't take long before they fell kind of in a disarray. They were just, some of them were pulling back, some of them were holding the line. Rice saw that the confusion was taking place, and he stood up and said, "Get your act together here," basically. And he said, "Follow me." And he launched his own personal countercharge against the Confederate line as it was getting closer to the Union line during Pickett's charge. Being the first one out in front, and of course, being an officer, he became a target, was very badly wounded, refused to go back for aid, and continued to lead his men. And 4 of them actually captured flags and earned medals of honor of their own under Rice's leadership. Rice lay wounded between the 2 lines for some time until Pickett's charge was driven back, and he was able to get some kind of treatment for his wounds. He was wounded again later in the war at Spotsylvania, and at that time was disabled to the point where he was captured, was sent to a prison camp. And on the way to that prison camp, he cut a hole through the floor of the train car that he was in and dropped down onto the tracks with the train passing over him at about a 15 mile an hour or 20 mile an hour speed, as the reports say, and hid for 23 days until he was able to get safely back to the line. He survived the war and went on to become very prominent in the GAR in later years. Eventually, he passed away and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery in Section 3 up on the hill above the unknown soldier's tomb. This is his gravestone. Obviously, he's very proud of being a Medal of Honor recipient. This is a replica on a boulder. He didn't get 2 of them. Some did. Some got the Gillespie Medal after they got the original medal. Rice only got 1, but this is the front of his medal. This is the back, and it's a depiction of his citation engraved on this. But you can see this up in Section 3, where a number of Civil War dead are buried. I'm going to close my story here today with this man, Major Charles Capehart, from the 1st West Virginia Cavalry, who got his on July 4th, earned his on July 4th, didn't get it for many years. One of the 2 last recipients of the medal, earned his on the night of July 4th. We know the heat was a tremendous factor in the battle of July 1st through 3rd. Heat, humidity, and as often is the case, when you have a lot of heat and a lot of humidity, it precipitates thunderstorms. And that's exactly what happened on July 4th. Torrential downpours, as we know. And this happened on the night of July 4th during the retreat. The 1st West Virginia Cavalry was part of the Union Army that was was chasing the retreat of Lee and trying to catch up with them and capture them. When Brigadier General George Custer, who had just become a brigadier general prior to the battle, came under ambush from the rear guard of the Confederate Army at Stone Mountain. The battle raged in this pitch darkness, basically. The only light they had was from lightning. Fire at the muzzle loaders. Whatever you saw flash, you shot at that flash. Capehart came up on this with his men at the peak of the fighting and ordered his men to draw their sabers. He said, if you see somebody with a saber, don't shoot him. He's our guy. That's the only way we can tell who our men are. After some fighting, he launched a charge in the dark down the side of the mountain. Totally caught the Confederates by surprise. Some of them began hand-to-hand fighting. Some of them immediately threw down their arms in confusion and surrendered. The 1st West Virginia Cavalry was credited with capturing 300 wagons, 15 ambulances, about 1,300 prisoners of war, including 200 officers. So they did yeoman's duty in capturing this group, and he was awarded accordingly with the Medal of Honor about 25 years later. But he got the Medal of Honor for this action. Now, I included him because his brother Henry was the surgeon for the 1st West Virginia. 3 years before Charles earned his Medal of Honor, Henry was awarded one for diving into the Greenbrier River while the regiment was under fire to rescue a drowning soldier who had been wounded and was unable to reach safety. And he was given a Medal of Honor as well. So you remember if I mentioned earlier, there were 7 sets of brothers. This was one of those 7 sets, the 2 Capehart brothers. And Charles just happened to be one who earned his medal at Gettysburg. So I thought it was appropriate to include that as a representative of those 7 sets of brothers. That's my story. This is the book. It was published by History Press. If you'd like a copy, or if you have any comments or questions that you think of later, this is how to get in touch with me. I'll be happy to address your concerns, or if you're interested in a book. I'm not hawking the book, but I can make it available to you. I can sign it for you as you would like it to be signed. So feel free to get in touch with me, and thank you very much for your attention.